Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host Liam, aka Himvar, and it's been a minute. Not really super long, but a minute since I've discussed an Arthurian work. If you watch the channel, I like reading these things and just talking about it. So I recently read the Quest of the Holy Grail, or the Quest for the Holy Grail. Honestly, I think is a better title. This one right here is of rather than for, um, but either way. Um, I actually read this one and another one kind of in tandem, but just wanted to talk about it a little bit. As what's actually important is that this is an anonymous work. It does not have a known author. It's also part of a larger cycle that I know it really as the Vulgate cycle, though it is also known as the Lancelot Grail cycle. Most of this is, several romances pretty much tied together, and Lancelot is the main character throughout. So, in this part of it, though, the quest for the Holy Grail, Lancelot's sort of still the main character. Actually, he might get the most page time, at least in the first half. He definitely does. But anyways, let's talk about it a little bit. So this is written somewhere between 1215 and 1230. That's rather the whole cycle. This is on the latter end, so maybe 1225 or so. For the quest, and unknown author, of course, though there is one Walter Map that is attributed, though I believe one of the other names for the cycle is the pseudo Map cycle, because there's no way it was actually written by Walter Map, um, because Map died before 1215. So anyways, there are about 40 manuscripts of the quest in particular. um, I wish my lighting was a little better, I apologize. And none of them are the originals, essentially. So it is in Old French. It is prose rather than poetry, and I think pretty much everything I've looked at so far has been in poetry. There's been several looked at, like Percival by Chrétien de Troyes. I'm not sure actually if Peredur is in prose or in verse. I read in translation, of course. You have Sir Percival of Gallus, Perilous Faust. So, it is interesting that it is in prose, though. And it was actually rather a large influence on Mallory. Thomas Mallory's L'Amour d'Arthur, rather famous in the English speaking world. I don't think I've ever made a video on it, actually, but it's been a number of years since I've read it now. It's very long and very exhaustive of the Arthurian stuff. While Mallory feels very kind of on the gangster side of things because the guy writing it is more in the knightly side of things, which is different than, say, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which most likely that author is also on the knightly side of things. This is very much on the religious side of things, not the whole cycle, but this part of the cycle, the quest for the Holy Grail. So again, I read some of this one, which is translated by P.M. Matarasso, Pauline Matarasso, and then I read a little bit of another one by E. Jane Burns. I'm not sure I really have a preference in those translations, to be completely honest. Maybe like slightly on the Burns side, but not a large one. So let's see. This is again kind of set aside from that Lancelot story before, and then the last part of the cycle is actually the death of Arthur. So just the ending sequence of the Arthurian stuff. Um, I would say that this is actually, and it has been described actually, I believe it's in the intro here, yes, from Matarasso. This is not a romance actually, and is more of a spiritual fable. And I would agree, besides the fact that more broadly speaking, a romance is literally just something written in the Romance language, particularly Old French, right? And the reason that is because the Old French word for French is romance. Okay, that's where the word romance comes from. Um, and so it pretty much just means it was written in the vernacular. It is a more popular story rather than something written in Latin, which would have either legal purposes or religious purposes strictly, though this is actually heavily religious. It, I would say also Lancelot having his lack of chastity is a big focus, especially early on. Um, and also we have like Percival not quite being seen as chaste. Here he's also not the main character. If you know, in those earliest holy Grail things, in fact, they're not even holy so much. It's not clear what the Grail is, but Percival is the main character, right? So Percival is not the main character here. He is one of the characters, since he's one of the protagonists. In fact, the thumbnail is going to be Edward Burne-Jones is Galahad, Percival, and Bors at the Grail, and it is a wonderful painting. I recommend go looking at the whole thing, actually, since I can't fit it all in the thumbnail. Well, not the way I'm going to do thumbnail, at least. All right, and so we also have a new character, though, because Percival is not quite good enough, right? We have Galahad, which Matarasso suggests, and this is one of the ideas, though it's not the only idea, and she does not go into all the ideas, but one of the ideas is that Galahad is just a version, an old French version of Gilead, which is one of the names of Christ, right? So this is, and he is a very Christ-like figure. So the story itself focuses largely on 4 knights. There's Galahad, Percival, Bors, and Lancelot. Gawain's also in here as well, but Gawain doesn't really get a redemption. Gawain doesn't really have a very nice arc. If you want a better Gawain, go read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. That is much more satisfying as a Gawain fan, and I am a Gawain fan. But that is one thing you'll notice when you read Arthurian stuff, is that all the knights are not treated equally, and depending on what source you're reading, the knighthood itself might be treated differently as well. Like I said, in this case, it's very much focused on spiritual matters compared to like Mallory, right? So who proves worthy of the Grail in this, though? So, well, none of them have the same fate, really, but they will all attempt to make their way to Saras, essentially, and to participate in the office of the Grail. So Galahad is very saintly, maybe to the point of not seeming very human, even. There are times, but also other times where he's just not super easy to connect with, I would say, as a reader. Percival is simple, childish in his stupidity, childlike, though, in his devotion to God, and is very endearing in his human qualities. Bors doesn't face really physical temptation, but intellectual temptation. He is discerning, prudent, understanding of church teachings. I think his temptation is actually largely more entertaining than, say, Percival's in this story. His is the story of reason, and he faces a moral dilemma, essentially, in this fable. He also has, like, probably the least amount of time of these main characters actually on the page. Lancelot is, again, not successful so much in this quest. He's dashed from the heights of greatness to the depths of sin in his fumbling. He's weighed down by his lust, and he stumbles a lot. He really gets humbled by it, but it's actually really kind of encouraging. Maybe I'll talk about that a little bit more, but like, he has the chance to repent, and it actually happens relatively early on, where there's a scene with the Grail, and it doesn't go as he wanted it to. So Gawain, again, the paragon of knighthood, the ideal of chivalry, is a steadfast friend, but these are worldly attributes, apparently, and here he fails in spiritual, essentially. His goals are good, but he has no follow-through. Not my favorite Gawain, again, in fact, probably one of my least favorite Gowans, but definitely, again, serving as a foil, and kind of almost as like a tragic comedy, which is how stupid he is at times. So one thing that's very common, speaking of the spiritual aspects, is that the white-robed hermits or monks or whatever, right? And these are obviously members of the Cistercian order, not mentioned by name as far as I'm remembering. And there are allusions, many allusions and references to scriptures. Oftentimes they're, again, just referred to directly. It's heavily didactic, heavily. Often with an encounter or a dream that then has a vision that is confusing to the knight, but explained by a hermit or some other figure. There is a strong theme of in these of temptation of lust, as virginity is held in the highest esteem for men and women, mind. This often leads to scalding of knights for their fallibility, but there is a chance of penitence, essentially. And at times it's kind of boring because of that. It reads a little bit less like the Romans, and not nearly as entertaining, for example, as Percival. But encouraging in a spiritual sense. I mean, if you can get into it, it definitely gives you a nice grasp, I'd say, of like how medieval Christianity might have thought about something like this. Though you might find it overly preachy, but I mean, that's exactly what it is, which is a very nice look, like a time capsule that is saying it's 800 years old, and that's pretty cool. So we do get a lot of time with Lancelot in this one. He's really the main character, again, of the Vulgate cycle anyways, though Galahad actually has an interesting aspect where he comes and goes. He's kind of like Gandalf, if you ever read some of Tolkien stuff, coming in and out among various adventures of the Knights of the Round Table. And Galahad himself isn't quite perfect, right? And it is mentioned here, actually, in the story, that if he were to fall in mortal sin, he'd be like any other knight. So there's the chance then that he could, right? And remember, knights cannot do more than the grace of our Lord, as it says often in the book. So interestingly, the story's climax is partially a spoiler early on uh, by Percival's aunt, actually, though it works as a prophecy in a sense. And there's also Merlin's prophecies that come into play a little bit as well. And while being more religious than a romance, it is normally, if you would say, a spiritual fable, even, it seems a proper label. It does have some fun action, a sense of noble right aspects of the perilous seats, a sword and a stone, special shield as well. It also has the castle domain king, but is set up early to end there, and it isn't about Percival not asking a question, right? So in a lot of ways, it doesn't have as strict as a nice beginning and end as say like the Percival stories. It's not nearly as entertaining as that. But the Grail, though, here also just for those interested, is also it's a platter, kind of sort of acting as a um, sorry, what's a horn of plenty, and but most importantly, it is holy, strictly holy. Okay, it is brought to Britain by Joseph of Arimathea, and it is the sign of a favor with God if you can behold it. There's also other things, a focus on Galahad, the islands of Saris, Percival's sister even plays a role in here, and the sword of strange straps and some interesting sea adventures. Um, and even Christ himself makes an appearance in this one, which is interesting. So again, it is an interesting spiritual fable, yes, piece of Arthuriana, and I'm glad that I've read it. Again, like I said, not as entertaining as some, highly informative though, and enjoyable. I can recommend it if that sounds interesting to you. I think if you want to get a good idea of the Grail, this is actually a rather important one. I would argue, and so um, and especially in context of it being holy. I mean, this seems to have been written by probably a Cistercian monk or someone very much indebted to them, and so I think that definitely lends a certain quality to the story that is very unique, at least in my experience so far, and very enjoyable. So I just want to end though, and these are with some quotes, but these are from Bohr's his part, and again, I enjoyed his part maybe more than the others. Percival's parts are still as well good as well, but he says at one point, "I feel that one's goodness depends less on his father and mother than on the person's heart. Also, to advance the cause of justice and loyalty, and to defeat violence, that is the goal of Bohr's." I found that interesting. I mean, because the advance the cause of justice and loyalty makes sense to me as his idea of a chivalrous knight, but then to defeat violence has definitely given me something to think about. So, anyways, check it out. Lean from Lyceum. I'll catch you next time.